Hi Stir, I am Liz West and we are here at the British Council for the occasion of my new exhibition, Tiered Reflections. I consider my practice to be broad and overarching. Predominantly what I'm interested in is light and colour and how the two things behave together and in sync, and how I can manipulate them to create new spaces which might force people to look differently at the world around them. What I want to do is simply get people to look up. You know, we all live in this world where we are obsessed with technology and our phones, and we're always therefore looking down. So I want to create these immersive, kaleidoscopic environments that make people look harder. So the different mediums that I'm using, whether it be paper, sculpture on an intimate or monumental scale, indoors or outdoors, permanent or temporary, are all a self-portrait. I have seasonal affective disorder, so I get really low in the dark British winter months and need light. We all need light. It's joyful. It creates better moods. And that's what I want my work to do for the viewer. When I make a new work, often it can be site-specific. So the first thing I always do, and any artist making work responding to a space must do, is do a site visit. Now, obviously, there are times where I can't visit, so I ask for photographs and videos, and certainly that was the case in Jodhpur for the Art Week, where I couldn't visit. I was in Brazil doing a solo show. So I had many video calls with the team and was shown many different sites as potentials for where to put my work. But it was only when we confirmed the stepwell that I knew what I wanted to make. So the site comes first, always, and then the work comes second. And even if I make a work that is to tour, each time it's different because it responds to the space. I take information from the space around me. For example, here at the British Council, the piece is toured from Jodhpur, but it's completely different. I came in, and I looked at the floor and I looked at the geometry and the pattern, and I thought that's what I want to respond to, and the work is a direct response to the pattern of the space that it's in. I think it depends on the site that I'm working in, but obviously I'm challenging the site, but I have to also be respectful of the site, and I think that's really important. So how I've done that is try and think of works that are modular and that don't fix to the space. So working with historical spaces, you can't hang or stick or glue. The other thing is I wanted to be sustainable. So I didn't want to make work that was so site-specific that it had to be ripped out at the end and end up in the bin. In terms of my work being a provocation of the space, I would say that my work aims to challenge people's perceptions of the space and of themselves by being in the space. And I do that by being thoughtful about our needs as people and the space we inhabit. When I made Tiered Reflections, first of all at Jodhpur Art Week, I had never been to a stepwell, but I'm very familiar with the architecture of them. I think they're magical places, Disneyland for adults. The architecture, the geometry, the pattern, it appeals to everything within my body and fibre. So when I landed in Jaipur 10 days ago, I was very, very keen to go to one. And I was taken to one and I just loved it. Similarly to the Janta Mantras, which no one would know this, but as a 2-3-year-old, my mum, who's also an artist, had photographs sent by a friend of the Janta Mantras both in Delhi and in Jaipur. And those photographs seeped into my psyche, and I often wondered, where was this place? Would I ever get to visit this place? And yet I saw my mum's practice develop with ideas of time and geometry and space based on those photographs. And yet here I am, having seen them both in the last few weeks. I feel incredibly touched and blessed. What I'm trying to say is these places I've been aware of forever. I know them, but to step foot in them is magical. And of course my work relates to them, but what I can't wait to do is go home and see what comes as a result of this trip to Delhi and Jaipur. When I knew that my work was going to the stepwell and I researched things like really intensely, and I looked at videos and photographs of the stepwell, the overwhelming sense was that it was a square pattern. I'm also really interested in the temples and the palaces in India, often that have amazing tiles and patterns around them. So it instinctively felt right to make the piece for India squares. It didn't feel like a very circle-based place. I also wanted to do something different and challenge myself, and I never worked with the square mirrors, and I felt this was potentially the right place to do so. When you install the piece with circles, it's very organic and they are looser in the sense that you can overlap and overlay them. However, when I've been making the piece here at the British Council with the squares and instructing the piece in Jodhpur, I felt there was many more limitations because of the format. So in my head, where I give myself sets of instructions for how to make my work, I didn't want it to just be a random selection and orchestration of the mirrors. It had to have a pattern to it. But of course, with squares, you can only do that in so many ways. And that I found quite challenging because I don't like being limited, but I also like being challenged. The difference between the circles and the squares in terms of the orbs and the reflections it sends out aren't that different because it's more abstract. What the difference is the physical artwork, the sculptural element of the artwork on the floor. What hasn't changed is the plinths and how they're held up. But what takes the longest is getting the lighting right. So before you start laying down the mirrors on the floor, no matter what shape they are, you have to light the work before the work's there, which seems counterintuitive and the wrong way around, and everyone always questions it. Everyone, all the technicians always say, well, why are we just lighting a floor? Well, once the mirrors are down, there's no way you can get in there to light it. So it's a very back to front process, but it works. I never thought being an artist would take me to such varied countries around the world. I feel incredibly lucky to be travelling the way I do. And every time I visit somewhere, obviously I'm looking around, I take everything in, I'm very in touch with my surroundings, I'm very sensory. And I let it seep into the practice, and sometimes that's not intentional, and sometimes it's absolutely intentional. And I think it's a collection. I have a collection of experiences that I'm gathering. And as my practice goes on, which hopefully will be for a lifetime, I will reference all these amazing cultures. However, one thing is to be said about light and colour, and that is it is universal in its language. It crosses territories and boundaries and religions and genders. And that's why I love it, because it speaks to everybody. When I make a new work, it has to feel like it belongs. That underpins everything, and that's why I'm a researchaholic. I spend a lot of time reading and looking at images, and that makes up the majority of my practice and my time. This sense of something feeling like it's always been there, or that it's meant to be there, is really important. I think there are trends in the art world, especially in Great Britain. I know that I am not following those trends, and I've known this for a couple of decades now. But what I also know is that I have an absolute fascination, an obsession with colour and light. And the way I use them is completely instinctive. So I'm not prepared to bend or change. What I'm going to keep doing is exploring how I can use these media and how they fit into the world around me. And like the work of other artists who I admire, other artists who are using light, they're not bending either, and their work is popular and remains iconic around the world. So it is my aim to keep going and change the perceptions of what a British artist is. I think I'm doing that successfully because here we are in Delhi and my work is shown more internationally than it is in the UK. And it's one of those odd situations where you almost have to prove yourself overseas before they invite you back home to do the big retrospectives. So let's watch this space.